Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Buddha, the blessed, noble, and fully self-awakened one. So on this particular video, I just want to move to the chapter 3 on the mind, and I've chosen the first 2 verses. So I shall chant them in my own inimitable way. Pandanang chapalang chitang durakang duniwarayang ujung karoti me dawi usukaro wate janang warijo watale kito ukamo kato ubato paripanda tidang chitang maradayang pahatawe. Translation. So it's a very quick one, fairly literal. The wavering, unsteady mind, hard to control, difficult to restrain. The wise one straightens like an arrow maker straightens an arrow. That was the first verse. And the second one. As a fish quivers when taken out of its watery home and thrown onto dry ground, so does the mind quiver when it is taken out of the sensual world to escape the realm of Mara. So that's the verse. So how did this come about? So we can go to the story. So the story of Thera Maggiya. So while residing at the Chalika mountain, the Buddha uttered these verses. And it was in reference to this Thera Maggiya. Now, a Thera is an elder. You have to be a monk or a nun to become a Thera or a Theri for 10 years. After 20 years, you're called a Maha Thera or a Maha Theri, which is a big Thera, a big elder in one way or the other. Now, these days, you don't normally use the word Maha Thera except people who've become quite elderly. The interesting thing about a Thera is that they can ordain, but it's not, you don't do it that way. Usually you belong to an order, a sect within the Buddhist monastic community, and somebody is the head of that, and that's the person who would ordain. And so that way, it is said you can trace your lineage all the way back to the Buddha. Now, at that time, Thera Maggiya was attending upon the Buddha, and on one occasion, on his return from alms round, the Thera noticed a pleasant and beautiful mango grove, which he thought was an ideal spot for meditation. So he asked the Buddha's permission to let him go there. But as the Buddha was alone at the time, he was told to wait for a while until the arrival of some other bhikkhus. The Thera was in a hurry to go, and so he repeated his request again and again until finally the Buddha told him to do as he wished. Thus Thera Maggiya set out for the mango grove, sat at the foot of a tree, and practiced meditation. He stayed there the whole day, but his mind kept wandering and he made no progress. He returned in the evening and reported to the Buddha how all the time he was assailed with thoughts associated with the senses, with ill will, and with cruelty. So the Buddha told him that as a mind, I've lost my, sorry about that. So the Buddha told him that as the mind is easily excitable and fickle, one should control one's mind. So if we go back to the verses, now in the first verse, there's nothing particularly important about the Pali as such, the words. So it's a case of the mind is excitable, unsteady, wavering. It's difficult to control, keep hold of. It's difficult to restrain. But yet one has to work at it as a Fletcher straightens a bow. Now I did go onto YouTube and I found out how to straighten an arrow. Sorry, not a bow, an arrow. And where the arrow is bent, you put it onto a surface, so the bow is sticking upwards, and then you rub it up and down with a piece of wood. And the friction of it creates heat. It's easily bendable, and then when it cools, it'll stay straight. There were other ways, but this is the way that I think the Buddha was referring to, because, of course, training the mind, you've got to keep bringing it back, bringing it back. The second one about the fish, a slightly interesting word there for fish, is warija. Now, wari is water, and ja means born. So born in the water, hence a fish. Now, as a fish quivers when he's taken out of a watery home, so the mind quivers when taken away from the realm of Mara. So now we are, of course, entranced by our senses, what we see, what we hear, what we taste, and so on. And suddenly to find ourselves in this inner quiet place, not feeding the senses, then obviously those old habits go berserk. They want to be back out into the world, engaging with Mara, the enticer. And so just like a fish taken out of water, you know, almost gasping for oxygen and quivering, so the mind is gasping for these sensual delights. So that's a good, I think that's a very good image. The Buddha is very good at, you know, these little metaphors just to get across his meaning. He says some people think like that. So people have, you know, imaginative, poetic minds, and others have very intellectual. Most of us, of course, are in between. So now, having said all that, does he somewhere give ideas on how to train the mind? Well, now for this, we have to go to the scriptures themselves. Just before I go, I'll just read the commentary. So there's a commentary on all these Dhammapada verses and on the scriptures. The story of this verse is the same as the previous one, so they're both much the same. Our mind is indeed wavering, writhing, and difficult to restrain, and now they want to give us an image like a snake or a young branch. So an arrow maker making an arrow has to straighten it, otherwise it would be worthless. In the same way, we have to straighten the mind, otherwise it won't hit the goal. The goal, of course, is Nibbana. Okay, so now how to stop thinking. So this is in the Middle Discourses, the Majjhima Nikaya, number 20. You can look it up yourself there. I shall only, you know, mention the various ways in which it can be done, and then we'll see. So the first thing is that the mendicant should focus on some other foundation of meditation connected with what is skillful. So, for instance, if erotic images appear in the mind, one thinks of the foulness of the body, and that definitely undoes the eroticism. So that's one example. Food, when you're eating food and you're feeling greedy, you know you're overeating, then just imagine what happens to the food until its final elimination, and that would definitely put you off eating much more. So it says here that with sensual desire, always try to create the other, the opposite. Now, you're not trying to develop disgust and self-hatred and all that, or hatred towards the body, rather. You're just trying to balance it. So when something pleasant comes up, which is an obsessive thing, one brings up the opposite and it cancels each other out. So it's just a way of undermining these unwholesome habits. If it's directed towards an inanimate object, then of course it's impermanence. So you might be wandering around the shops, you know, escaping from lockdown and seeing all these wonderful clothes, and then you recognize that, well, you know, the body's impermanent, clothes are impermanent, everything's impermanent. So that undermines that greed. That's what we're concerned with. We're not concerned with not buying clothes. We need to dress ourselves, yeah? When thoughts of hate arise, of course, towards the other, the opposite is loving kindness. And if it's towards a an inanimate object, and in other words, a greedy desire to have something, then see it in its characteristics, the four great elements. You know, that it is actually just something that comes together with pressure, with heat, with something that is elastic and moving, a movement. In other words, just deconstruct it, just see it for what it actually is. And thoughts with delusion are slightly different. That would be something like doubt or something like that. So then, of course, it says just live with it, you know, put yourself under the guidance of a teacher, study the Dharma, inquiring into its meaning, listen to the Dharma, and inquire into its causes. So here we have, number one is the mendicant should focus on some other foundation of meditation, on some other object, usually the opposite or something that undermines whatever is causing the mind to wander. The second one is to, you know, if it keeps going, if that doesn't work, then to examine the drawbacks of these thoughts. So just remembering that unworthiness of evil thoughts, it causes us to be shameful. Now, shame doesn't have very good support in modern psychotherapy, but that would be neurotic shame. There is a shame to do with self-worth, with self-esteem. You know, that if I did that, it wouldn't be me. That sort of statement that we have about ourselves. And sometimes we feel a sort of an inner shame, you know, thinking about these things or getting ourselves into those sorts of mental places. So this is only about thoughts, remember. And of course, to understand that there are dangers, because when you develop unwholesome states, they do, you know, grow within ourselves, and every so often they'll escape through what we say and even through what we do. So there has to be a little bit of dread of consequences there. The next one is a little bit difficult for us, to try to ignore them and forget about them. So when the mind is just restless, now sometimes the mind is just restless, it's just moving all over the place, in which case the best thing to do is just to, as it were, push it aside and bring the attention back into the body. So sometimes that works, sometimes they do forget them. Of course, here we're talking about training the attention to be still. This is obviously a little bit of suppression here, but we can deal with these things much better when we've attained some level of steadiness of the mind. And then it says you should stopping the formation of thoughts. Now that's interesting, because the Pali uses the word sankhara. Now sankhara are our habits, our volitional formations. It's what we have created in ourselves through acts of will. All our negative speaking, all our anger, all our anxiety, all that is self-created, just as much as our love, our happiness, or joy. So here, it actually translates this sankhara as a condition, right, to stopping the causing of thought. Now here we can ask the question, what is the cause? You know, why is this happening in me? Now that's getting us close to a more vipassana position, where we would then go into the body to examine the actual mental state that's causing the thoughts to arise. And of course, that's where we would stay. We would stay there investigating, feeling, allowing this mental state to express itself. And then finally, if all that doesn't work, the Buddha says, with teeth clenched and tongue pressed against the roof of the mouth, they should squeeze, squash, and torture the mind with mind. So that sounds pretty heavy. But here, what the Buddha is saying, that we should really replace an unwholesome thought with a wholesome thought. Now, this is especially useful if you're trying to develop a particular mental state, such as loving kindness. If you find that you're very involved in some sort of hateful thing, angry place, anxious place, doesn't matter what it is, one really just keeps those beads. You use beads, you know. Say, may all beings be happy, may all beings be safe, may all beings be healthy, may all beings, and you just pound, pound, pound. And what you're doing is creating a mental state, right, which will eventually sit on top, keep these unfortunate states underneath. And you are developing that mental state. You know, when we practice this, we are developing loving kindness, but we're not, of course, looking at what's underneath this stuff. But again, the purpose is to still the mind, to stop this energy going up into the head and creating this vortex of energy. Yeah. So, you know, just to go through them again, focus on some other opposite to what we're actually you know, experiencing. If it's something to do with anger or hatred, you do the loving kindness. Examine the drawbacks, feel the shame, the dread of consequences. Just ignore them and, you know, just put them away. And then you can go into the causes of those thoughts. You know, why are they happening? And finally, to dampen it down by a strong loving kindness practice or compassion practice, joy practice, or peacefulness practice. May all beings be peaceful. May I be peaceful. May all beings be peaceful. Something like that. So what we've done is we've read these two little verses. The mind is excitable and unsteady. It is difficult to control and to restrain. The wise one trains his mind to be upright as a fletcher straightens an arrow. So that's a slightly different translation. As a fish quivers when taken out of its watery home and thrown onto dry ground, so does the mind quiver when it is taken out of the sensual world to escape from the realm of Mara. So, I can only hope my words have been of some assistance, that they have not caused even greater confusion, and that you will, by your devotion to practice, liberate yourselves from all suffering sooner rather than later.